You're listening to the REITE Club podcast, where the focus is all about helping you grow your real estate investment portfolio and live the life you want to live. Come grow with us and join our community at thereiteclub.com. And now your hosts, Sarah Larby and Alfonso Salemi.
So most of my files that I've received in the past 8 or 9 months, it's very similar, and most of them are because a tenant is not moving out, or a landlord is selling off their rental property because they're not receiving rent anymore, and to cover the damages they're forced to sell their homes. And even then it comes down to, even when you're selling your home, is the tenant going to be moving out? So that's the one most common case that I get on a daily basis. Tons of phone calls about how do I have my tenant move out. It's the same question that has started since COVID started.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot in the papers. It's like, even as a principal residence, people are buying tenanted houses and they were promised vacant possession, which I think you're not supposed to right now. And then they become homeless. So what do you do? Like, what's the recourse there?
I think the first step would be to, when you are looking at, into buying houses, knowing how hard the times are right now, dealing with a tenanted property. I think the first step is to be very careful and have an open communication with the seller, because when it comes down to having the tenant leave the property before the deal closes, you need to have a written agreement from the tenant. Verbal, most times a tenant would agree with you verbally and say, we'll move out, but when it comes to the date or before the closing date, they are very much allowed to change their mind and stay in the property. So it comes down to the buyer, arranging for a different place to live momentarily until the tenant decides to leave. So, the first step would be to be careful. And second, always have a written agreement. You have to usually serve an 11, to the tenant, that mutually ends the tenancy, in case if you're renting out. But when it comes to selling and the new buyers moving in again, it has to be Form N12. And that states that, the buyer, the landlord themselves or the new purchasers, they are moving into the unit, and hence they require the tenants to move out. Now, just because a tenant signs that form or agrees to the form doesn't mean that they legally have to leave. They can sign it, and a month later they can call you and tell you that they're not leaving. In that case, you do have to file an application with the Landlord and Tenant Board, and then you're going to have to wait for an eviction order. And with COVID right now, and with the eviction ban that we had, during the last lockdown, they are giving out eviction orders, but you're just not allowed to enforce it until the lockdown restrictions are lifted. So it's just a matter of, communicating with your realtor first and foremost, and making sure you're having those talks with the seller, because what a tenant does, it's really not up to the seller or the buyer, right? The tenant is a whole different unit in the deal, and what they do totally affects the deal. But I'm also getting a lot of complaints from the buyers that the sellers have not done their best. But to be honest, sellers, it's really not up to the sellers. The sellers are probably trying their best, to have the tenants move out, and it is out of their hands. Like, as landlords, we're not allowed to kick our tenants out. Ontario protects tenants a lot. So when it comes to protecting landlords' rights, we just have to be super careful and very, very patient when you want those tenants out.
It's just amazing to me. Maybe appalling is the right word, that you can even have a signed piece of paper, basically a contract, where the tenant agrees to do something, and yet they can change their mind at the last minute, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, they won't be able to leave, right away because of that, and you're not allowed to kick them out. But the question that I get from clients all the time, so are they going to be living in my unit forever now? No. So it's just a matter of, you waiting for that hearing or that order from the board. And as soon as you have that, you can get them out.
Except that if you have an order from the board, then, I mean, at least in Ontario, and I don't know what it's like in other provinces, you then have to, if they don't leave voluntarily, you have to get the sheriff involved, correct?
Usually you have to get the sheriff. Like that's the most common scenario. It's just for your own safety, because you never know how a tenant might react to when you show up. So the only way to enforce it is to have a sheriff with you.
And what kind of timelines are you seeing? Like you mentioned being patient. I have a situation like this. It's been almost 2 years now. So like patience is a virtue, I guess, but I'm starting to lose it. But what are you seeing? Because I was told mine is a bit longer than usual, like 20 months, 21 months seems to be long, but
When it comes to normal applications like L1 and L2, when you're evicting the tenant because of, non-payment of rent, or you're selling off the unit, we're looking at about 15 to 19 months right now just to get a hearing with the board. Usually that would have been 3 to 4 months before COVID. So because we are so backlogged at the board, it has been extending since COVID started. And when situations are a bit more complicated, it could take longer than 20 months, like you said.
okay. And I've been told that, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I've been told that even police officers can't really help. So some people have that misconception that you have a bad tenant, they're trashing the place, and then you call the police. Well, that's not the case. They can't really help unless I think it's a fire hazard or there's some sort of drug dealing or illegal activity. Everything else, they can't help out.
Yeah, so police, they don't really have the right to, get involved in anything that is related to tenants. But when it comes to safety, like you mentioned, illegal activity like selling drugs, just anything that is illegal, or when it comes to somebody else's safety, like say you have a tenant and their neighbor has complained to you that the tenant has, hid their son or just ran over their dog with their bicycle or something like that. When it comes to, danger and safety of others, there is a deadline that you can get, file a notice or, give them the form, serve them with the notice that says, this is because of danger and safety of others. And they do have to move out in that scenario. I think they have 10 days from when they get the notice. And in that situation, you actually do not have to go to the board to evict them because it involves with, safety. So they have to move out by the end of the 10 days. And if not, you can actually get the police to be involved in that scenario only.
I would imagine though that that's a fairly rare occurrence, and it can't be abused, because the last thing a landlord should be doing is sort of making a false claim and trying to get them out that way. That's not the way to go.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is hard to prove though. Sometimes I've recently had a client whose whole whose whole unit was damaged, and she said it looked like somebody broke in. The tenants were not living in it. She found drugs, but the police weren't going to help her out at all because she doesn't even know where the tenants went. They left the unit, so there's nobody to serve that form to. She can't empty out the unit because it's legally still her tenants. So now she has to sit there in the corner watching her unit get destroyed. And she honestly, like, as unfortunate as it is, she's not able to do anything at the moment.
Can you take some extreme measures as a landlord, like tear down the building or something if you can't find the people? I mean, if it's that destroyed, I guess you could demolish the place.
You could. I think the safe timeline to wait to see whether the tenants return is to keep an eye, visit the unit, see whether their stuff are the same, whether they're taking out their, belongings, or does it all look the same? The proper amount of time that's advised to keep an eye is about 6 to 8 months. If they're not returned by then, you can go ahead and again, you still have to write a notice. You have to write a notice and you have to serve it to that empty apartment, just in case they ever come back, and leave it like that. And when you see that it's, it has passed that timeline, you can go ahead and, clear, take out their stuff, demolish and repair whatever you may see fit.
Thanks for listening to the REITE Club podcast and joining our community of real estate investors online at thereiteclub.com, where the focus is about helping you grow. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks from your hosts, Sarah Larby and Alfonso Salemi.